Greetings. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. I'm so glad you've come on. You can find me at LEAD1225 on Twitter if you'd like to look, or of course the blog that I just mentioned. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about motivation and what motivates people. If you are trying to win friends and influence people and you're trying to be successful in your life by obtaining a lot of influence and power and motivation, then the way to do that is to identify some of the current studies, current practices, and to figure out what people are doing in the world to influence others. And when I speak of power and influence, I mean in a very positive way. I'm not trying to use the negative connotations of power in particular. I'm focusing on how can you positively influence people, how can you be impactful, how can you engage your audience, how can you get the right kind of attention, how can you influence listeners. This is something that's applicable in businesses, and it's applicable in churches, it's applicable in synagogues, mosques, anywhere you go. If people are trying to influence others through leadership positions, they need to embrace the current knowledge that we have. So what do we know about motivating people? And when I speak of motivating, you think of the outcomes. Motivating people to attain better organizational commitment. Motivating people for higher job satisfaction, higher engagement. Motivating people to follow your ways, to think the way you do, motivating people to listen to you and to take you seriously. So I used this particular video that you can see below a picture of Dan Pink, and it's from a TED Talk, and it's called The Motivation Puzzle. And one of the things that Dan Pink says is this. He says, businesses make assumptions that are outdated, unexamined, and rooted more in folklore than in science. And if we really want to get out of this economic mess, and if we really want high performance, we shouldn't entice people with a sweeter carrot or threaten them with a sharper stick. We should focus on what's intrinsic, the intrinsic motivators. People aren't motivated anymore that much with money. Sure, money can motivate to a point. It motivates you when you don't have the money to pay your bills, you don't have the money to cover your food and your shelter. But after you get beyond that, we talk about the Maslow's hierarchy, and we get to the higher level self-actualization. And we focus on what people really care about, what really motivates them. And it's the intrinsic stuff that makes a difference. So Dan goes on to say that the three things that he finds are wonderful motivators are purpose. That's the idea that we serve a greater purpose, something higher than ourselves. We all seek that. Autonomy, which is the idea that we direct our own lives. And mastery. And this is the idea that you want to get better and better at something. Now, there was a study that came out not too long ago, it's in 2000 by Kinnear and colleagues, and they found that when they surveyed 7 major world religions, along with atheism, humanism, and the United Nations, they found out that everyone, without exception, desired a higher purpose. They looked at the doctrines from these different faiths, and they found that in all of the doctrines, people desired a higher purpose and meaning. They wanted to do something greater than themselves. They also knew they ought to follow something equivalent to the golden rule. So the golden rule is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So people understand these basic intrinsic motivations. So why are people still trying to influence in ways that don't work? I have an example of one. This is Ray Comfort. As you're watching this, ask yourself, is this man motivating me to action? Is he inspiring me? Notice the signs in the background. So if you notice the signs in the background, one of them that you weren't able to see quite clearly was talking about hellfire. This is the hellfire preaching that actually, unfortunately, is quite prevalent in some churches. I did a YouTube search on that for hellfire preaching and I identified quite a few videos where people think that the method of using the stick, the very harsh stick of hell, is going to be an effective motivator to turn people to Christianity or to other faiths that are related to hell. So this is not an effective motivator. You will not gain people's, you will not influence people in a positive way. They will not leave with positive feelings. And I'm not talking about prosperity preaching. I'm talking about just looking at what's intrinsic to people. If you want to motivate them to follow the faith, look to the aspects of the faith that actually Jesus put out there for us to use to motivate people to follow him. We merely have to have people follow his example. We should show that kind of thing. That is what is influential. So here's just another example from a person called Charles Lawson. And this is in a church. This is what he finds motivating.
We all know that one of the worst things about our political system is the nefarious and
Okay, so I'll skip ahead as soon as we get to that. Excuse that. I was pre-planned to not have that. Here we go.
The preacher begged you to get saved and you rejected him. The memory in hell must be horrible torment. The thirst must be horrible. It must be terrible to burn night and day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you say there is no hell. To your surprise, you'll find it out firsthand. And the rich man died, and he continues to fall. It's been 2,000 years since the rich man died, and he's still falling. He's still falling deeper and deeper into the pits of hell.
Okay, now ask yourself again, is this going to motivate you to follow the Christian faith and feel good about it? Or are you feeling that you're being coerced in some way to follow based on the fact that you think that you want to avoid hell? And then, of course, the vision that he gives us of hell is something that I don't think would be terribly motivational to people. In fact, it could inspire some rebellion.
Behind a hearse.
Now this is the effective means.
You've invested a lot in your education and people have invested in you. And let me tell you, the world needs your talents. Man, does it ever. The world needs a lot, and we need it from you. We really do. We need it from you young people. I mean, I'm not speaking for the rest of us up here, but I know I'm getting a little grayer. We need it from you, the young people, because remember this. So you got to get out there. You got to give it everything you got, whether it's your time, your talent, your prayers, or your treasures. Because remember this. You will never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. I'll say it again. You will never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. You can't take it with you. The Egyptians tried it, and all they got was robbed. So the question is, what are you going to do with what you have? I'm not talking about how much you have. Some of you are business majors. Some of you are theologians, nurses, sociologists. Some of you have money. Some of you have patience. Some of you have kindness. Some of you have love. Some of you have the gift of long suffering. Whatever it is, whatever your gift is, what are you going to do with what you have? Fail big. That's right. Fail big. Today is the beginning of the rest of your life, and it can be very frightening. To accept new views, and to be open to new opinions, to be willing to speak at a commencement at one of the best universities in the country, even though you're scared stiff. While it may be frightening, it will also be rewarding, because the chances you take, the people you meet, the people you love, the faith that you have, that's what's going to define you. Never be discouraged. Never hold back. Give everything you got. And when you fall throughout life, and remember this, fall forward. Say thank you for grace. Thank you for mercy. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for wisdom. Thank you for parents. Thank you for love. Thank you for kindness. Thank you for humility. Thank you for peace. Thank you for prosperity. Say thank you in advance for what's already yours. That's how I live my life. That's why I am. One of the reasons why I am today. Say thank you in advance for what is already yours. True desire in the heart for anything good is God's proof to you, sent beforehand to indicate that it's yours already. I'll say it again. True desire in the heart, that itch that you have, whatever it is you want to do, that thing that you want to do to help others and to grow and to make money, that desire, that itch, that's God's proof to you, sent beforehand already to indicate that it's yours. And anything you want good, you can have. So claim it. Work hard to get it. When you get it, reach back. Pull someone else up. Each one, teach one. Don't just aspire to make a living. Aspire to make a difference.
Wow, see an incredible video and you think to yourself, what is holding you back? As Jordan Peterson has said so many times, he talks about you don't even know what you're capable of. You don't know if those constraints and those restraints and everything else that have been holding you back, if they were gone, how would you be? Consider Captain Marvel. If you actually follow the Marvel comics, which I do because I have a couple of young teenagers. So we watched Captain Marvel, and after she was able to free herself from the binds that were holding her back, she became incredibly powerful, way beyond her every dream. And that's sort of what Jordan Peterson talks about a lot when he talks about how you are capable of more than you can even possibly imagine. So think about what's holding you back. Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it mistrust? Did somebody betray you? Is it addiction? You know, I heard a really interesting video on addiction the other day. The video, there was a person in the video who said when he was young, he would wake up and he would go and find some of his relatives, and sometimes he found it really hard to wake them up. And he said he didn't realize why until years later when he looked back on it and he found out that some of his relatives had addictions and drug addictions. And the drug addictions were holding them back. They were making them, they weren't able to achieve anything that they wanted to achieve. And so he decided to set out and try to figure out what causes addiction. What is it? And he said, what are the prison systems solving this stuff? Because the prison systems round people up and toss them into prison, and they're into a cell all by themselves, and they aren't set out to rehabilitate them. They're really into holding cells, just putting them in a box and making them lonely in many cases, or surrounding them with really awful people. And that doesn't free them from their addiction. They get out and they still end up being addicted in many cases, or they go back to their addictions. So he looked at a study where they had a mouse. I think it was either mice or rats, but they were in a little box, this mouse, and they would separate the mice and put them in the boxes. And in the box, there were two things. One was a water bottle, and the other one was a bottle that was laced with heroin. And the mice that was in the box all by itself would try both and then start just drinking the heroin laced water, and eventually the mouse would die. So that was what was going on. And so he said, well, they decided to take a different experiment. So they put mice in boxes together. So they put a bunch of different mice in a box, not just one mouse. And the mice were in the boxes, and they would put other things in the boxes. So it was kind of like mouse heaven. There were all kinds of activities in the boxes. There were balls, all kinds of things, you know, plenty to eat, plenty to drink. They had the opportunity to drink the heroin-laced water, or they had the opportunity to drink just the water alone. And he found that the mice in those situations, because they were surrounded by a social structure and many other mice, and they were happy and they had things to do and lots of activities, that the mice did not go for the heroin. They ignored it. And that speaks to addiction. That speaks to something that he pointed out at the very end of the video, and I'll link it here. He pointed out at the very end of the video that people need connections. And if you want to cut that particular type of problem, cut addiction, just go in and try to find friends, try to find connections, try to build commitment with family and friends and others so that you have a structure and a social network, because that will free you. And if that's what's holding you back, there could be other things holding you back. I'm not sure. But I have another thing that I would like to read to you, because I mentioned a lot. I've already talked about a street evangelist whom I didn't think had a terribly productive approach. And then, of course, I showed you the other situation with the Hellfire preaching in a church. Now, here's an example of a sermon that I heard at Christmas time a few years back in the Bell-Shoals Baptist Church. It goes like this. There was once a very wealthy old man who lived in a mansion, which was adorned with all sorts of expensive items. Exquisite pictures and paintings lined the walls. Fine furniture filled the rooms, and fancy decorations were placed all about. The wealthy man had but one son, and the son joined the military. He died soon afterwards while serving in the war, which greatly saddened the old man. One day a friend of the young man who died came to the house of the old man. He carried with him a portrait of the old man's son, which he had painted himself. He told the old man that he had served with the son in the war, and that the son died while trying to protect him. The portrait was his way to remember the love the son had shown for him. He gave the portrait to the old man, who thanked him. The quality of the portrait wasn't to the old man's usual standards, quite unlike the portraits he had purchased in the past. Yet something about the picture was unique and precious. It was something about the eyes. They were exactly as the old man had remembered. He hung the portrait in a very prominent place in the home, just above the mantel of a fireplace. A few years passed before the old man died. With no other family members to inherit his wealth, he directed that an auction be held. The first item to be auctioned was the portrait of his son. People came from all around to the auction, anxiously anticipating the opportunity to purchase some valuable items. When the auctioneer held up the portrait, no one bid on it. He called out again, and a little old lady who worked as a maid in the old man's home bid on the portrait. She gave all that she could afford, which was $50. Since no one else bid any higher, the portrait went to the lady. The auctioneer then announced that the auction was over. People were shocked, asking about all of the other items in the home, and about the home itself. It's over, you see. The will said that everything goes to the person who purchased the picture of my son. Thank you so much for coming by. I hope you'll like and subscribe and come again. Goodbye.